Welcome to my channel. I am Jonah MacTavish-Slaton, and today I want to look at a couple of genetic reports. The first report is a genetic comparison to regional populations. So this is my genetic makeup versus regional populations in modern times. The way this report is set up is that it measures the autosomal DNA from both your mother and your father's side, so both your mitochondrial DNA, or X DNA, or X haplogroup, and your father's side, the Y haplogroup. So what it does is it measures the genetic distancing to each modern population that closely, or most closely, resembles your genetic ancestry. So this first report is ranked 1 through 10, and now this is genetic populations of anywhere in the world. So you may have other DNA from other ancestry there, but this is just the top 10. This is what I'm the closest to. The way it's measured is if it's 1 through 3, that is your genetic, or anything actually below 4 is your genetic group. This is your DNA family group. Anything below 6 is your heritage group. So think of it on this particular report. 1 is you, 2 is your father, the 3 range is your grandparents, and the 4 and 5 ranges is your great-grandparents. I like this report very much because it is a more accurate report. We know that the big DNA companies such as Ancestry, Heritage, Family Tree, 23andMe, they use a percentage base. Now, that is not entirely always accurate. Now, this report is very much in line with some of the genetic ancestry because you just can't make up your genetic closest links to your ethnic background. But the percentages you inherit from different parents funneled down from your grandparents and great-grandparents can vary a large amount, and you may not inherit the same genetic groupings as, say, your brother or your cousins or your nephews. So it's going to be a little bit different. This, though, however, I think is more accurate because it gives you the genetic distance between the inherited admixture within you to these other groups. So as we get started with this is where I place in the world the genetic rankings. So the first one is Arcadian. Now, all the other ones are a regional displacement, in particular, mostly by country identifier. Arcadian is a little bit different because it has such a strong group. There are places in Europe where you have this admixture. In particular, sometimes the Scandinavian itself between Denmark, northern Germany, and southern Sweden. Also, the Dutch, the Belgium, the Swiss, and the Australians and South Germans sometimes belong to a mix. Switzerland itself with French and Italian, and German. So there's different things, but this is a unique one because it carries on a percentage of Irish, and when we say Irish, it's the Irish Gaelics, and then the Ulster Picts from Ireland, along with the Scottish people, which are Scottish Picts and Brythonic Celts. And then the Scandinavian admixture, which is people from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. So that is my number 1 ranking. That's what I would say as a regional overall I'd be closest to at 2.82 genetic distance. At number 2 is Irish at 3.09, which again, that is part of the Arcadian grouping. At 3 is Scottish at 3.11. 4 is English at 3.33. And Danish at 5 at 3.51. So you can see how 2, 3, and 4, and 5 have a link to my number 1 ranking. Now to round up the top 10, Norwegian at number 6 at 504. German at 7 at 5.14. Belgium at 8 at 5.25. And Dutch at 9 at 5.58. And Swedish at 10 at 5.65. Now I don't have any close ancestors that are from Belgium or Germany or the Netherlands, but these go back further back to 8th, 9th, and further beyond as far as ancestors that came from the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. But this is my top 10 regional genetic population groups. I think it's pretty cool that Arcadian is my closest. If you take someone from Arcadia, or Orkney, it's the Orkney Islands, off the coast of mainland Scotland to the north. If you look at their genetic makeup and their admixture, that's who I most closely represent or resemble. These people would also be very, very closely related to the people of Shetland, and as well as the people of the Hebrides. There's this Irish, Scottish, Pictish, Gaelic mixed with Norse Scandinavian. The next report I want to take a look at is a localized genetic population in modern times. So this is a little bit different. So this one would be, you would be anything below 3, and your father anything below 5, grandfather below 6, and so forth. So the genetic distance calculator for this is a little bit different because this is pinpointing more of a localized DNA, while the other groups is where you share the most percentage of your autosomal makeup. This takes your autosomal makeup and goes to a much higher magnified level, and who amongst that admixtures of your autosomals, what population group do you represent the most, or best represents your genetic makeup, your ancestry. So with mine, we're going to start out. There are 20 of these localized groupings. And number 1 is Irish Conic. Now, Conic is very easy to see because I have several family, more recent ancestors, and particularly the O'Golans from County Mayo. I have also other ancestors that come from Galway. So that at 2.89 is not surprising. Number 2 is the Scottish Highlands. This is at 3.13. Now, this is all of the Highlands. You will see some of the Highlands also represented here, but there's 2 breakdowns. There's a very small localized area, such as Conic, and then there's other areas which is more widespread, such as the Scottish Highlands. But that's number 2. So if you go back and look at my Arcadian, where Irish Conic, which is a mixture of Irish Gaelic, and the Scottish Highlands, which is mostly Pictish, then you can see how that formulates 1 and 2. Number 3 is Scottish Grampian, and this is the area between Aberdeen and over back toward Inverness at 3.15 at number 3. Number 4 is Kent, England. I don't have any recent ancestors to Kent, but autosomically there is levels of what we call the Jute and Geatish ancestry that is found prevalent in my haplogroup that came over from southern Sweden into Scotland. So there could be a connection there. Number 5 is Scottish Dumfries and Galway, and these are the border families, and this is more pinpointing down to the Dumfries and Galway area. The Dumfries would be more of this lowlander Scottish people. Galway would be more of a Brythonic Celtic people, and even possibly some Norse admixture there. Number 6 is Shetland at 3.35, which is goes along with the Orcadian and Hebridean admixture. And number 7 is Irish Ulster at 3.51. And number 8 is Irish Leinster at 3.52. And also at 3.52 is Scottish Fife. Number 10 is Irish, and what is Cork and Kerry, which this is more of a, like when we say conic, it spreads out through the province. But this is more of a angled into a location, kind of magnified. And I have the MacShans and the O'Hurleys. These are great-grandparents of mine that come from Cork and Kerry. So that was at number 10, 3.55. Number 11 at 3.62 is Argyll and Bute in Scotland. Now, this is the homeland of my maternal family on my mother's side. So the MacTavishes, the MacDougals, Campbells on both sides of my mother and father's family, the McGregors, and many other families that came from there. Number 12 is the Scottish borders. Like I said, Dumfries and Galway's there with it, but this is the overall borders at 3.82. Number 13 is Irish Munster. Like I said, same thing with the Scottish borders. This is encompasses more than just Cork and Kerry. It's at 3.86 at 13. Number 14 is French, West France. And this was particularly interesting at 14. It's 3.91, is that it could be Germanic Franks. It could be Celtic, Parisian, Gaulish Celts. It could also be Germanic from the sense of people from Normandy, the Norsemen, the Danes, and the Norwegians that settled there. It could also come back even further to when the people were leaving southern Britain when the Germanic tribes were coming in, and that was the Bretons that would come over to Brittany. These are Brythonic Celts. They're the same people that spread all over Ireland, all over North and South Britain, and these are the people that would be pre-Gael over in Ireland. Number 15 is Cornwall, England at 4.33. This is 100% without a doubt. This is going to be a Celtic marker, Brythonic Celtic marker, very, very much like Brittany. And that's why I brought up the Britons, because Cornwall is a direct Brythonic Celt connection. Number 16 is Orcadian, and this is specifying as Orkney, and this is taking a piece of that Orkney. It gets a little confusing, but we're taking chunks of the autosomal DNA, and so that chunk of DNA would be best represented there, even though parts of that chunk would be made up with people from Ireland and the Scottish Highlands. It's at 5.1. At 17 is the Welsh at 5.25. No very close recent ancestors, just like in Kent, but there is some further back at 4.25 or 5.25. At 18 is the Dutch and North Germanic. Now this is the people that are found in the Netherlands, southwestern Germany, and Switzerland. Now I do have ancestors in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, and in Germany, but most of them go back past the 6th generation or 6th great-grandfather mark, which would be 8th generation. And number 19 is at 5.45 is Denmark and southern Sweden. Now I do have ancestors within my recent ancestors from there, even though my haplogroup comes from somewhere in southern Sweden, before it ended up in Scotland and we became Scottish and later became Scottish and Irish. But these are ancestors not even part of that line. This is much, much later. And we have some that are found in Scania and some in between Uppsala and then in Vernhelm, and then some even up further north. So a couple of different great-grandparents there. And then number 20 is Norwegian Norway at 5.57. So when I look at this genetic localized process, I do have recent ancestors and grandparents from Irish Conic, from the Scottish Highlands, from Scottish Grampian, none from Kent, England at 4, but, you know, I got some from Scottish Dumfries and Galloway, none from Shetland in Scotland, but I do have some from Orkney, and we know that the people on the west coast of Scotland, such as Argyll and the Hebrides, are very closely resembling them. I do have very, very close ancestors and recent ancestors from Ulster, and then Leinster, and in Fife in Scotland, and Cork and Kerry in Ireland, and Argyll and Bute in Scotland, and in the borders of Scotland, and so forth. So, a critical thing I like about this is that if you look at both the genetic regional, and this would be kind of a far spread out of who we are. Now, because me and personally, if you look at, say, 23andMe, they show a little, like, 0.7% Spanish-Portugal. Well, this isn't going to show that because it's such a low level. This is just the top. And people in Portugal and in Spain would be very, very closely related to the Celtic people found in Ireland and Scotland and in England and in Belgium. Also, I have a fourth great-grandmother that is half Caddo and half Shawnee Indian. That's 6 generations back, and all the genetic testing shows that I have a trace amount, so it's like less than 1%. Typically, it ranges from 0.05, so about 0.5%, up to about 0.75, about 0.75%, or 0.75%. But it doesn't. That's very low on my ranking, and this is where I would stand. Who I am. I am an Orcadian. If you took my DNA and matched it to anybody in the world, I would be considered an Orcadian. Someone that is a kind of this mixture of Irish, Gael, Scottish pick, and Norse Scandinavian admix. And this is exactly what my family heritage shows if you trace my grandparents, and then people that were where they come from or where they were born. And then even some of my family that made it here to the States, where they trace their roots back. And all of the paper trails go back to mostly Ireland and mostly Scotland, with a little bit into further back into England and in Wales and into the Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, and in Sweden and Norway. So I think it's fascinating to look at genetic distancing rather than percentage based, because I think we get a more accurate look at who we are genetically and what our ancestral composition makeup of our admixture really is. So I would tell you, if you really want to map out your genetics and your autosomal makeup and see what you've inherited from your ancestors, I would use in particular the Oracle calculators. You can find them on GEDmatch. I use this with DNA genetics. And that's what I love about DNA genetics, is that it gives you all these calculators and that you can use. You shouldn't see any surprises, because this is what you're going to find on Family Tree and Heritage and 23andMe and Ancestry. But over there, it focuses more on percentages, where this breaks it down to more regional levels or localized levels, and it really gives you a better look at who you are and how you inherited your genetics through your ancestral trail. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And I would just encourage you to reach out and use these calculators and dig a little bit deeper. But always stay true to your paper trail, because that really shows the migrational patterns through marriages and birth certificates and deaths, wills and deeds and everything else. Gives you probably your best trace and identifying of your most recent ancestors. But this adds to the proof of how close that really is, and were they who you think they are, because sometimes they're not always the ethnicity or the classification of ancestry as we think, because surnames change, people migrate from one area to another area, and sometimes we typically don't know their complete genetic makeup or their admixture. But the Oracle calculators really takes all the guessing work out and really puts it into who you are. But as always, keep learning, keep studying, keep figuring out what makes you you. And genetic DNA studies is probably one of the most profound spots to link up your actual paper heritage and family history to your actual DNA. Thanks for watching. I'm John MacTavish-Slaton.